All right, so a small lots of conversation. Okay, so we'll start. Good morning. That's a little better. And then over on this side of the room, good morning. Good morning, there we go. And so I apologize in advance because I do like to move around a little bit as I talk, so I'm about to probably produce a repetitive strain injury for the camera operator here as he has to go ahead and do that. And certainly a pleasure to be here and share just a few minutes of some passion that I've got with you, and you'll soon see that. I tend to get a little excited when I'm talking about some of my favorite things, so seeing how it won't be the least that I'm talking about this morning, we'll move on to some other things. Just a quick question, how many people drove here today? Yeah, okay. I was making good time this morning until I got to, well, until I hit the 401 from Waterloo, then things slowed down a little bit for me, but big 18-wheeler stalled right in the center lane by Mavis Road, slowing things way down as I'm driving here, getting all tense and stuff like that, and getting ready to explode, but figured, hey, they'll just juggle the schedule and make stuff happen if I'm running later, those kinds of things. And then I get here, and so I'm late and don't get my PowerPoint presentation on here, because you got to have a PowerPoint presentation. Then we got to have a little timeout. But at least I brought this.
That was easy.
So that was easy. We're set to go with the easy button for today. My name's Marty Fraser, and as Richard said, about 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to at first become involved with this project in its infancy. Had a chance to go to a couple of conferences, attend some focus groups, and learn quite a bit about truckers. Because up to that point in time, my entire experience had been in manufacturing-based environments. Lots of repetition, lots of people, lots of interaction with things that are going on. And as I learned a little bit more about the trucking industry, it became very apparent to me that truckers do not play well with others. They are people that like to be by themselves. And that creates a challenge for us because, and in one of the focus groups, one of the individuals said, I don't really try to manage these guys because they like to be out on the road by themselves and doing that. And that was something completely foreign to me. So part of my approach here this morning is to try and provide some information that I think is critical to what everyone should know about how injuries happen. And you're about to see a video that was provided to me from CRE-MSD. And so my apologies ahead of time to the person who's in it, because they may not know that they're about to be shown here. But if the gods of PowerPoint work for us here, what I'd like you to do is to just watch this. Maybe. Any help? Any thoughts? There's 100 PowerPoint experts in the room. All of you are thinking, he just needs to do this. Well, it won't click on the movie. I can't find a cursor. Oh, see? Just needed the expert. There we go. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So go ahead and watch. There's about a minute of things here. 3 or 4 situations I want you to just identify to yourself where injury might happen. And can we dim the lights? Is that... So I'm going to challenge the gods of PowerPoint again here. Start from the beginning. Let's kill the front one too if we can. There we go. It might need the sound, but some of the things that get said you shouldn't hear. So. All right, so what I'd like you to do is to take about 2 minutes, and with the person beside you, I'll play this again, and it'll be okay with the lights up. I'll play this again. What I'd like you to do is to identify where you think, in each of the clips, where an injury might happen. So the operation or the job, as explained to me, is called tarping. Got to take a tarp, put it over top of the stuff, tie it down, and away you go. How many people here have ever done this? Okay, some skilled operators here. Okay. So what kind of, I've never tried it. I've only ever seen it in a video. Doesn't look very easy to me. What body parts do you think are at risk of injury performing this particular task? And so if the experts won't answer this question, then we'll see how the others are. What body parts? His entire body, low back. Why his entire body? Little slip there, yeah, you saw that as he was walking along. Okay. Why else? Okay, lots of musculature and things involved there. Why? Okay, awkward positions. What's that tarp weigh from an expert? Conservative estimate. About 80 pounds, okay, somewhere in there, okay. And that's, yeah, a lightweight tarp. And on that particular vehicle, there should actually have been two where that was part of the discussion that was going on, okay? So 80 pounds, maybe a little bit more that he's got to wrestle up. And I clipped out the really bad part where he was throwing it up on top there, so you didn't see that particular part of it. Lots of aspects there. What else is at risk of injury? So you saw the tarp at... Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, so lots of risks just in the environment that he's working in there. Yeah, okay. Lots of particular challenges in here. And that's just from this one particular little clip that we've seen. How would you change that? Okay, maybe two people. Okay, at the end of it, when the tarp's on the ground and it's got to go up onto the truck, normally they would do that with a forklift, they said, so they wouldn't wrestle that component up there. So lots of different challenges to this particular thing, but maybe there's just not a lot that you can change. Maybe it's just sort of the way it is for that portion of it. So now we've got somebody who's got stuff that's difficult to change, a challenging work environment, likes to work by himself, so there may not be somebody else around to do some of these particular things, and yet we've got to somehow reduce the risk of injury for this individual. So it leads me to this question. I want to talk about tissue injury, and my question to you is, how does a tissue get injured? And so what I want to do is give you just a real quick hands-on experiment here, because I am a pointy-headed academic, even though I'm out in the private world now, or working in plants and things, but I want you to have just a little bit of an experience here. So what we provided you with is some tissue right in front of you here. Okay, so if everyone will go ahead and take your tissue. And before you do anything, because I got 3 kids at home, and so they're always rushing into stuff, I want you to watch, because I'm a trained professional. Okay. It took me 8 years to get my PhD, so I could do this. Okay. Okay, did you see it? Oh, see, somebody wasn't watching, because I just saw a popsicle stick go sailing over there. Okay. Fortunately, we got spares, okay? So what I want you to do, and there was a crack from a very dry, brittle popsicle stick. So what I want you to do is to take this tissue, apply just a little bit of force, and then relax. And Matt's now ticked at me because he got a defective popsicle stick. Okay. So just a little bit of force, and then relax it. And in 99% of these popsicle sticks, what happens? It bends, and then what happens? It returns. It goes back. Okay? It's a perfectly good popsicle stick for most of you. You can still use it, which is exactly what we would like to do with any tissue that we could have in the human body. You'd like to go ahead and challenge it, and then you'd like it to return to normal. So for this half of the room, what I would like you to do is to carefully, and this part's challenging, I want you to take your popsicle stick and just crack it, okay, so that it can still bear load. Okay? But just crack it. You see it working so hard. Now for this side of the room, what I'd like you to do is to take your popsicle stick and just in one foul swoop, just go ahead and rupture that. So now we have two injured tissues here. We have sort of like maybe torn anterior ligament cruciate ligament, something like that, okay? Could be a fractured bone. Could have a completely ruptured ligament. Could be a completely ruptured tendon, muscle, okay? Some sort of thing like that. But we were able to induce a tissue injury. And what was the mechanism? How did we make that happen? We applied some force, but the very first thing we did, we applied some force, and there was no tissue injury there. What was the difference between the first thing you did and the second one? Excessive force, okay? So we had more force than this thing could handle. And when we look at tissue injury, how does a tissue get injured? Tissues get injured when the applied force is greater than the tissue tolerance, as demonstrated here. And what's exciting about this particular thing is that if you want to draw a picture of it, and you go ahead and you look at the force or how much you can push up on the side here, and my understanding is all these presentations will be available to you afterwards, versus the time that we've got. In red, we have the tissue tolerance. We go ahead, first experiment we did, we applied a force, nothing happened, thank you very much. Okay? We had a margin of safety in here. The second thing, whether it was the crack or the complete rupture, as soon as this crossed this line here, the tissue injury occurred. So, applied force greater than the tissue tolerance produces a tissue injury. So, one mode of injury that we can have. I now need a volunteer, please. Oh, I love it when people are quick to volunteer. Okay. Now, please note that I brought the very flimsy coat hanger from home, not the very thick, heavy one. Okay, so Doug's got a little bit easier job here. But what I would like you to do, I'm just going to close this down so you don't hit yourself in the eye when this spins in your hand. Okay. Just one foul swoop. Just want you to go ahead and induce an injury in this particular tissue for me, please. Yeah, go ahead and just, just make an injury, okay? But it's still good, right? Like it can still bear all of its force. It's not injured, but I need you to injure it. How's he going to injure that? Repetitive, yeah. So we'll let Doug go ahead and work on that. Because to you and me, that's just a coat hanger. In olden days, it used to be a way to do $300 or $400 worth of paint damage to your car while you're trying to get your keys unlocked. Until look at that. Okay, round of applause. Okay. Now, when he did this, what happened to this material? It weakened. It got softer. What else happened to it? It warmed up. Okay, so its properties changed. Thank you. Here's a souvenir for you. Okay. For that portion. He's not interested in that at all. So the properties of that particular thing changed over time with the repetition that we had going on there. So we can go ahead, we can model that up as well. So here we've got the series of repetitions that Doug did. At the beginning, big safety margin. Over time, the tissue properties start to change and decrease so that eventually, applying the same force, it crosses that boundary. And what occurs? And what occurs? Yeah, there we go. Okay, tissue injury. So that participation part, when I do this, means I'm expecting an answer from you, okay? So they got it. And so when they cross, what happens? Tissue injury. There we go. The participation will come. I guarantee that that'll happen. And so then we run into a third situation where, well, I asked how many people drove here this morning. I drove. Took me about an hour and a half to do. These particular people that we see out on the highway with the transportation. They drive quite a bit, and you end up being in a position that you're in right now where you get to sit for an extended period of time. Okay? Or, as my wife told me, go in and bathe those kids. They need 20 minutes of bath, okay? Especially when they're young, my young kids. Okay? Had to spend time in. How many people have kids? Lots of kids, right? And you know that when you put a young kid in water, coefficient of friction goes down to about 0, so they're just slippery all over the place. And it's hard on your back because you're kneeling, you're bent over the edge of the tub, the kid's swimming around in there like an octopus or something like that, sliding all over on you. And when you stand up, your back doesn't feel very good. And we see that you're in sustained postures for an extended period of time. For me this morning, an hour and a half while I was driving in. Fortunately, when I got out of the car, I didn't have to do much except pick up my laptop and run in here and not slip on any ice as I was coming in. I'm not the kind of person that had to jump out of a vehicle after being in that extended period of time, or get out of the vehicle and then rush and do something immediately because just in time, right, for those things. So what I've got here is another tissue. And I'm not going to do anything to this tissue. All I'm going to do is apply a load to this tissue. And I'm sorry for the people that are right behind me in the pillar. I can't. Okay. Just going to have this thing here. And nothing happens. I didn't apply any increased force. It was just constant. It was just in that position. But over a period of time, the tissue tolerance changes. So one constant steady force over a period of time, the tissue tolerance changes, and eventually that injury occurs. So 3 different modes of injury, all that produce an injury because we've got a high force, we've got a low force with repetition, we've got a low constant force kind of injury. And when we put these things together, one of the fascinating things about the human body is that it's not metal, it's not wood. It has the ability to recuperate, to change. That's why we go to the gym to work out. We can bulk up. And so our failure tolerance or our tissue tolerance, after a period of time, we may do a shift, a series of repetitions. Our safety margin decreases. After a nice evening, this comes back up. We go through a whole week, a whole series of repetitions. This decreases. We get a nice 48 hours off, okay, weekend off. It improves. And then eventually, after a year or a career, you've done all of these repetitions. This thing has changed so much that you hear the statement, I've done this my entire life. Why would I get injured now? Because eventually, the applied force was greater than the tissue tolerance. So think about that for a second. Applied force was greater than the tissue tolerance. And the other thing, so there's one mechanism of injury, 3 different modes, as well as a 4th one, because we have to add up all of the stuff that happens under here, the accumulation of all of these things, because it's not just the peaks here, it's all of the stuff that happens as well. So the 4th mode, the cumulative effect of all of these things, adds up. But the underlying mechanism is when the applied force is greater than the tissue tolerance, an injury occurs. So knowing this, what 3 possible things can you do to reduce risk of injury? 3 possible things you can do, just in general terms. Yes, Doug?
Extend the repetitiveness time frame between activities.
Okay, so we might do something to change this portion out, okay, which is going to help with the cumulative side of it, the 4th one. So now that's 4 things, because I wasn't thinking of that. Good job. What else can we change? Okay, we can do stretching, but what's it going to change in these things? Because this is what happens with injury, right? Okay, I can decrease this applied force, which is going to give me a bigger safety margin. What can I do with this? Okay, might be able to increase the tissue tolerance somehow. Certainly lots of research that needs to be done because this is an area that we don't know a lot about, and that's hard to do, okay, to do that portion of it. Okay, we may be able to protect it, which will We'll do that. So we can increase this, we can decrease that. What's the third thing we can do? Well, that helps us with this. And the third one's really going to hurt your brain because it's the addition of the first two. Okay? We can do this, we can do that, or we can do this and that. Okay? All of those things which will help us increase the safety margin. And so when you start looking at interventions or changes or things that you would like to do, I challenge you to say, am I trying to decrease the applied load with that? Am I trying to somehow increase this through a protection or perhaps some extra thing that somebody does? Okay. Am I changing this, that, or am I doing this and that? But at the end of it, if you increase the safety margin, what have you done to the risk of injury? You've decreased it. Okay. So for sure, that will do that. So in summary for tissue injury then, one mechanism, that is the applied force is greater than the tissue tolerance. 4 different modes. Could be a high force, could be a low repetitive force as I demonstrated, or as Doug demonstrated. It could be the constant force situation, as well as the total, the cumulative of all of those things that are there. So now you know how tissue injury happens. And then, the next little bit, my last couple of minutes that I got here, is to get you excited about, well, how do you communicate with somebody like Matt, or myself, or Richard, or the engineers that are in the world that help design some of these things and some of the modeling things that Matt does, okay? How do we go ahead and how do we measure this? So for this one, I need 3 volunteers, please. I got 3 kids. I'm incredibly patient. Okay, all right. We'll give you the easy one then, Doug, okay? All right, so Doug, what I'd like you to do is just stand here with your right arm just straight out in front of you, please, okay? Palm down, perfect. Okay, Ernie, yep, straight out in front of you, palm down, yeah, that's perfect. And Joseph, if you could go, but just face the audience so they could, there you go, perfect, okay, for that portion of it, okay. And so what we need to do is, we got to make these guys fatigue here a little bit, okay? So there's that, okay. This is very valuable to me. Okay, so which shoulder is going to tire first? Ernie's, Joseph's, or Doug's?
Joe's, he's old.
Definitely some tissue tolerance challenges there as he swings my laptop. Okay, you can go ahead and put your arms down, okay, for that portion because that is a heavy laptop. Who's going to tire first? Why? Okay, so excellent answer. Let's say that he's got something really, really, really heavy, because I don't do math very well. He's got something that's just a little bit heavy, and he's got nothing, kind of like Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Now who's going to tire first? Really, really heavy. Okay, and then second, Ernie, and then Doug, because he's got nothing in there. Okay, thank you very much, John. Okay, round of applause for him. Yeah, that part was easy. But that's not a farewell gift. So what they hold directly determines how challenging that particular thing is. But now what I would like everybody to do is to go ahead and put your right arm out in front of you, please. Okay. And now I'd like you to put your left arm out in front of you. And then other than having a huge wedding ring or watch or something like that, which of your arms is going to tire first? Well, you might say maybe I'm right-handed and I work a lot with that, okay? Lots of stuff for that, so it might be stronger. But in general, they're going to tire about the same. So what I'd like you to do is now take your left arm and just bring it in like this. And now my question is, which of your shoulders is going to tire first, the right or the left? But the load is the same. How can that be? You can go ahead and put your arms in. Okay, so it is extended, and now we get into the part of the world that Matt gets excited about when he wakes up every morning, because we're modeling the human body, and if we model this as a single point, it's way out here. But this one that's bent in is real close. So both the magnitude of the load, the size of the thing that you have to handle, and where you handle it with respect to the joint of interest matters. And this, I think, is huge because it provides a segue into the world of how we can start making effective change. Because the moment of force, as we call it, or torques, that's what it is, a torque, it cares about both of those things. The size of the load that you've got and where it is. And you can measure it very precisely if you'd like, but it really doesn't matter because you just need the Goldilocks and 3 bears. Is it a lot? Is it a little bit? What am I going to do? But it applies to everything. It applies to spines. It applies to shoulders. It applies to knees. Okay? It's related to strength, how strong we are. We measure that using a maximal moment of force. And in the body, that thing gets resisted by muscles, ligaments, soft tissues, even bony stops. All of the things that you identified that could be at risk of injury in that first video. So bony stops, things like your elbow when you do a backhand. Okay? God gave you an electron process so your arm doesn't swing away when you do that. So all of those tissues are there to prevent or to handle that moment of force. So if the load increases out here and increases my shoulder fatigue or the strength that's required or the effort that I have to give, I can decrease that by either making the load smaller, I can bring the load in closer to me. Both are things which decrease the moment of force that's required there. And if I decrease the moment of force, or if I decrease the demand on the tissue, what do I do to the safety factor? I increase it. And so earlier I challenged you to think about those things. Which way is it working? How's that happening? So that produces this. Now this is very, very, very powerful. And in a minute you're going to get into the rhythm of this thing. Because I've identified this, or I coined it as the Cascade Effect. That is that the greater the moment that you've got, then the greater the tissue force is. And the greater the tissue force, then the less the safety margin is. And so if we want to decrease injuries, and we want to do that by decreasing the tissue loads, then we have to think about moments of force. And so, repeat with me, the greater the moment, the greater the tissue force. The greater the tissue force, the smaller the safety margin. Now that's pretty weak. Okay. So as my last effort then, just before I have to finish up here, what I'd like is just a little bit stronger, please. Okay? We won't compete sides because we don't have enough time for that. But the greater the moment, the greater the tissue force. The greater the tissue force, the smaller the safety margin. Okay. And so if you want to decrease risk of injury, you need to take those things into consideration. The moment of force, you need to consider how tissues get injured. One mechanism, but two very powerful concepts. Because once you have this knowledge allows you to have some know-how. Thank you very much. Richard will be happy because I managed to put you right off schedule again.
We do actually have time for some questions if people have them. We have a microphone that we'd ask you to use, but I believe you would be open for questions.
Yeah, always open to answer questions.
This guy's used to answering questions. He's too tall. Ask him a question.
Left them speechless, which is probably one of the first times, or they're very keen for the break. It's a toss-up as to which of those two things it could be.
Going once? Going twice? Oh, we have it.
Hi. Hello. Fitness, age, how does that all affect everything? Like the older the worker, the better fit the worker is? Does that make a big difference?
Excellent question. Okay, so the question was, with the effective age and fitness level, how do all of those things factor into it? Well, one, they affect the tissue tolerance that you've got. So as we age, we lose that ability that's there. And so you can go ahead and you can improve that. You can go to the gym and work out and lots of things that you do. So that helps that side of it. But eventually, we lose that battle for that portion of it, which means it's even more important to look at what the demands are and try to get methods to reduce those demands so we can keep the safety margin going. Secondly, we don't know a lot about those things. The University of Michigan, probably 15 years ago, proposed a big study where they would go out and measure the strength of the population in all different joints and positions so we would know what people were capable of and then have some design guidelines. U.S. government chose not to fund that. So that's a study that's still waiting to be done. And so those things are all factors. We lose it as we get older, so we need to really know what those forces are or provide this information to people so that they can make their own choices as they're going ahead and attacking these things. Another question back here. Well, they'll want it for the audio tape, though, so that forevermore.
Have you done any studies on this is better then, on fatigue, where tissue injuries are involved as far as being tired and aging as well, just to add on to what this gentleman said?
There's lots of interest in that area, but very little work that's been done. And a couple of challenges that just make that hard to do is, one, the group that you can get to fatigue the best are young university students, because they're not going to class anyway, so you might as well get them involved in a study. The problem is, kids these days, they don't work very hard. So it's hard to fatigue them, okay, for that portion of it. But you can go ahead and do that, but it's a really hard study to do because you got to get them to work for an entire day and then measure them. And then go ahead and work for another day and then do that and then do it. And then once you get some results and you publish those, then people say, well, yeah, but that's kids. We'd like to know on real people how that works. And then you go to a company and you say, we would like you to be involved in our study. We're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to follow your people. We're going to measure your people. And we'll get them to fill out a few questionnaires and things like that along the way while we're doing it. And we're going to be with this person for about a week and with your company for a couple of years so we can see what happens over time. And there's some interest in that, not a lot. But then the other challenge is you got to have a control group to measure those people against. Those are the people that get nothing out of it. And it's hard to get people to be interested in a study where they have to do a whole bunch of stuff and they get no reward. Everybody wants to be in the treatment group, right? Give me the good drugs now. Somebody else can be get the benefits later. And that's the real challenge that we've got, is trying to get that research done in the world. So a long-winded answer to no, not very much. But it makes a difference, and it affects those tissue properties, and that's where lots of lab-based research is being done right now, and we'll start to extrapolate that out. Wow.
Do you have research regarding the impact of ergonomics and the effects on reduction of potential accidents by ergonomic environment?
Yes, and it pays. I don't have the slide here, but I would give credit to Ted Vandevis, the CEO of AUSA, which is just down the hall, and he's probably got a picture of this in his office somewhere. If you plot out the global competitiveness of a country versus their, I'm just going to say, health and safety lost time injury rates, the lower the lost time injury rate, the more globally competitive they are on that index. And it's a direct relationship. So my answer then would be, because ergonomics makes a difference in those two particular things with respect to tissue injury, that it definitely has a payoff for it. Making the business case is hard, particularly because of measuring the cost and the indirect cost. But go ahead and grab that WSIB factor of 4 and multiply whatever you invest in it, and that's how big your savings is going to be. Doug.
It's a question that everybody comes up with at the end of the day, and that is when we talk about the safety factor in our businesses and in our workplaces is a dollar figure, the cost figure. Every tissue injury that I see and relate to any kind of work position, whether it be in construction, trade, or transportation, is a dollar figure to make equipment. And today's society doesn't provide us that dollar figure to be able to cost factor into our businesses. Is there studies being done about that?
So to make sure I understand your question correctly, are there studies being done about whether...
We know the studies are done for how to build the equipment, but how to afford the equipment in our economical challenges today.
That's an area that I don't have any expertise in, and I can't answer that question. Yeah.
I'm very glad to say that actually Vic is going to give a talk exactly on that topic just a little bit later after our break. So your topic question will be answered, hopefully.
See, now that's outstanding planning by the organizing committee. Good job.
My question relates to when workers wear back protective devices, back support. Overall, what is your opinion? I mean, would it over a period of time, would it harm the worker? Because obviously he's becoming dependent on that back brace for lifting or whatnot.
Back belts, back braces, back supports, however you want to phrase that. The literature shows that there's no direct benefit, there's no direct cost to people doing those things. So that's what the literature shows, and lots of challenges in that because you're assuming, the big assumption is that people wear them properly and things like that. I don't think they make any difference, and my personal recommendation on a group level would be not to invest in those. They may, on a case-by-case basis, be reason for prescribing them and following that individual and hopefully not having to use it forever. But as a group panacea, there's no evidence to support for, no evidence to support against. It's a hard study to do as well because you can't have that ideal group where you think you're wearing a back belt, but you're not really wearing a back belt like you can do with meds, right? Oh, I think I'm taking a pill. Now, you do have a schedule to follow. Not that I'm trying to get out from answering questions. I'd be happy to answer these.
Very interesting discussion and information you provided this morning. Just a question, where do you see exercise playing a part in reducing these tolerances to injury? And I just, there's a saying out there, use it or lose it. And if you, there's a situation, you're also about the repetitive work environment. Where does the balance, in your view, come on this? And I think of studies I've heard of being done with the astronauts going into space, where they lose body mass, bone mass, because of lack of gravity, not using their bones. The body will actually disintegrate as part of that process. I would think exercise would be a very, very important part of this process to reduce injury. And your comment towards that?
Exercise is a very important part, and your statement about use it or lose it is right on. The challenge that we have is that it's just one thing of many lifestyle choices that people make. Some of them are good for us, some of them are bad for us in those things. And you can't necessarily get gains from everyone if you were to make them all exercise, because it may not, they just may not do it, or they may overdo it and get injuries that way. So it's a tough thing to do, but it does have the potential for increasing our tissue tolerances that are there. And the genetic work that's being done right now, where you start seeing changes that happen inside the genetic coding of people as soon as they start exercising, and the things that start to get expressed and the benefits that come from it are huge. So my personal thing would be to say, yeah, go ahead and do it. The biggest challenge, or the biggest benefit, is to get people that are doing nothing to just get them doing something. That's where the biggest payoff is. So it's not that you got to do a whole lot, but just to go from being inactive to active is a huge payoff. And I don't know how we do that, but there is a benefit there for that, my opinion. Oh, sure.
Yeah, I just wonder what is the relationship between diet and rest between shifts and tissue injuries?
The question was, what's the relationship between diet, rest, and tissue injuries? And I don't know of any work that's been done that I could draw on to answer that particular question. Rest is important for tissues because they can recover, and part of the challenge that we've got is that's an area that we crop down on all the time for those particular things. But that's just a very general answer to your question. I don't have any specifics for that.
Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much, Marty, for starting us out.